Hello and welcome to the final week of the Loft's virtual Wordplay. My name is Caitlin Bolin and I am the Individual Giving Director at the Loft. We're so glad you're here. We hope that during the challenges of COVID-19 that this little corner has been a place of respite and creative inspiration for you. As you may know, when we began planning Wordplay, our intention was to have 100 authors and 10,000 visitors celebrating books in downtown East Minneapolis. Well, with a quick and thoughtful pivot, we have loved the opportunity to engage with you at home, bringing you conversations with today's top authors on conversation topics across the spectrum. Because you have shown up for us, we've reached over 40,000 viewers across the country. We are so grateful to provide all of our Wordplay sessions to you free of charge, and that is due in large part thanks to the forward-thinking generosity and leadership of our sponsors, and especially our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. We would not be here without them. And while their support has gotten us this far, we turn to you, our dear virtual audience members, to bring us to the finish line. This week, as Minnesota raises funds as part of #GiveAtHomeMN, and as we celebrate #Giving Tuesday Now across the U.S., we ask you to please consider including the Loft in your giving plans. Your gift of any size allows readers and writers to continue to receive support through classes, fellowships, events, challenging conversations, and more, all at the Loft. And your donation will automatically make you one of our fantastic members. We hope you will support us as we support the literary community. Thank you for all you do for the Loft, and enjoy Wordplay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steph Opeth. I am the founding director of the Loft's Wordplay. I'm so thrilled to be here today with you all. Before we get started, I wanted to thank our presenting sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune, for their steady support of Wordplay, even in its virtual form. If you want to support the Loft's programming, you can do so by clicking this turquoise-ish button below. And while you're there, you can be sure to buy the book I'm about to tell you about at that same button. Today, we are excited to have you join us for the Coworking Whodunit with Alex Steinman, co-founder of the Coven, and Andrea Bartz to talk about Andrea's book, The Herd. Loud applause. I always feel like it's just, I like to assume there was just clapping heard around the world. We will be taking audience questions at the end of this session, so be sure to use the question button below. And I think that's all I want to tell you. Oh, I also wanted to say a exhibitor that we were going to have when Wordplay was going to be in its in-person format was the Feminist Book Club, and they did an amazing podcast with Andrea about The Herd before this. So that's definitely something you can check out once this session's over and you feel like you can't get enough of talking about this book, because we certainly all feel that way on the staff. So I'll turn it over to Alex, and thank you so much both for being here.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks for having me. I'm Alex Steinman, CEO and co-founder of the Coven. We are a community and co-working space for women, non-binary, and trans folks. We're headquartered in St. Paul with a location also in Minneapolis. We opened about 2 years ago and just had opened our St. Paul location like a month before all of this happened. So we've switched all of our programming digitally too, and so I'm excited to be here virtually with all of you. I absolutely devoured this book. I read it cover to cover in like 4 days. It was amazing. And I'm excited to talk to Andrea Bartz, who's here with me now, about the book, about her process, some of the character development pieces. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. I will try not to give any spoilers away. I have like words on my page that say, don't say this. But Andrea, I just wanted to like give everybody kind of like the high level synopsis of the book to start.
Yeah. So thank you so much for saying you devoured it. That's kind of the idea. It's supposed to be a twisty and fun and fast-paced escapist thriller, which certainly we all could use some escapism right now. So The Herd is a whodunit set in an all-female co-working space in New York City that's called The Herd, emphasis on the H-E-R. That is sort of rocked by the sudden and mysterious disappearance of its glamorous, enigmatic founder, Eleanor, who vanishes the night of an important company announcement. And so it's up to sort of her best friends, who are also her co-founders and people that are very tightly enmeshed with her in a career sense, to figure out what happened to her and what would lead to her disappearance if she'd left voluntarily, if foul play was involved. And sort of the more they dig, the more secrets they uncover, and they ultimately are forced to sort of face what happens when high-performing women's perfect veneers begin to crack.
Ooh, I like it. I like it a lot. I should caveat, nobody has died or disappeared out of the Coven. So this is not based on
based on the Coven, I promise.
Thank you. But I devout as like somebody who is a, co-founder of a co-working space, and particularly something that, maybe looks and smells a bit like The Herd, was very intrigued by all that it had to offer. So I really deeply appreciated it. Before we get into, some of the similarities and the research that you might have done on spaces like this, I want to just understand your writing process. This book had so many twists and turns. I'm imagining somewhere on your wall, you've got like a beautiful mind, like string map and maze all around. Talk to us about like how you keep track of kind of all the different twists that happen throughout the story.
Yeah, I wish I were that organized to have the beautiful mind wall, both because it would probably make my writing process easier and more streamlined, and also because it would mean I didn't live in such a tiny apartment that I don't have the space in New York City to have anything on the wall. So when I do get to the point of like putting things on Post-it notes, I have to put them on the door and then take them down because I have no room. But the way that I write is actually completely off the cuff. I start with a hook. I start with just a premise. In this case, it was, a whodunit in an all-female co-working space, and the founder vanishes. That was all I knew at the beginning. And so as I'm writing, I have like daily word count goals, and sort of as I am building the manuscript, I'm figuring things out as I go, and sort of tossing, pulling pins out of grenades and tossing planes up into the air. And so the twists and stuff are hopefully organic feeling because they were very much surprises to me too. And there's these big moments of doubt when I'm like halfway, 2/3 of the way through, when I'm like, how am I ever going to land all these planes that I have thrown into the air? And I try out a lot of different suspects in a lot of different ways things could have played out in my mind, and then just keep writing. And eventually, miraculously so far, they've all come together in some hopefully satisfying way. But it's a wild, very stressful ride getting there. So I don't recommend that thriller writers copy my crazy method of doing it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. In preparation for this, I listened to the Feminist Book Club podcast that you did, and you had mentioned not knowing who is the done it in the who done it. And so I was like, how do you even write a book where you don't know who the villain is? But to some extent, I love the kind of multidimensionality of each person, that like they all have the ability to potentially be the villain or be the hero in the story, which is kind of amazing. For those of you too, I did buy the book off of Feminist Book Club, so you can buy the book right through them, which is awesome. I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration for the book, because at times it felt like if if seen the movie, The In Crowd, which one of the spaces that's mentioned is what is it called? The In. But The In Crowd or Girl Interrupted were kind of like vibes I was getting from the story. What were some of your story inspirations?
So I wasn't, believe it or not, basing it too much on any real life co-working space. I am not a member at any. I've been a guest at a few, including the Wing, which is the one that people sort of ask about the most often. But that said, I just noticed that there was a huge trend of them with places like the Coven and the Luminary and the Riveter and the Assembly. And, you know, there's at this point so many all-female co-working spaces. It was definitely having a moment. And for me, I really like setting thrillers inside of kind of these exclusive, juicy, complicated sort of social environments. And so, for example, for my first book, The Lost Night, which I also have a visual of, for The Lost Night, it's a whodunit that is set in like the warehouse parties of hipster Brooklyn in 2009. And so I was just trying to think of what's another sort of close-knit group of people, closed door setting, like really interesting, tangled social dynamics. And so I was working on coming up with the setting, and in my mind saw The Herd with the HER another color. And I was like, oh my God, a women's co-working space would totally use that. And it pretty much all grew out of that.
Did you like go to the space or get access to the space? Like how did you do the research? I mean, some of it was like, obviously there's a lot of press that you can kind of get from it. Their Instagram, like the Wing in particular, their Instagram is very visual. So you can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. But some of the things I was reading, I'm like, well, they do have this is right. They have a rooftop deck. They have a thing. They have avocado toast. Like all of these things are exactly like.
So, right, as I mentioned, I had been a guest at a few of them, and especially the Wing. And so from that, I had sort of these general impressions of like, was it actually avocado toast, or was it just something that's avocado toast adjacent that like feels like what they would serve at an all-female co-working space? I wasn't sure, but I had sort of these impressions from being there and just feeling like it was this feminist utopia. It was like Instagram come to life, right? And just so visually pleasing and beautiful and just all designed for women. And so I wanted to take that really serene and idyllic setting and sort of turn it on its head and ask like, what's underneath, what's below this shiny veneer again. And so once I decided I was going to start writing this book, I don't think I set foot in a Wing again. Or really any, I guess I went to some, dual gender co-working spaces for work dates, but I didn't want to accidentally get too stuck in what was real about the Wing and then not be able to make up my own fictional space that suited my needs. And so the research, I mean, I don't even know exactly what details I got right and what details, right compared to the real life, the Wing and what was made up, because I was really just trying to invent this space in my head that I could see very clearly and that worked for my purposes with, the layout and the different rooms. And this one has a workout room. I don't think the Wing has that, or didn't when I was writing it. And there's just a few differences.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what you've written about feels like, even the Wing times 10, right? There's this like extensive application process. You have to go through an interview, many things that we certainly don't have. And I just found it, a lot of my co-founders of my business, there's 4 of us, we're constantly like, what's happening now in the book? And I was like, well, you have to read it. But but they were like, well, what's the space like? And so it's funny kind of like sharing some of those things. And they're like, oh, it's not us. I was like, I don't think it's about us. Don't worry.
I promise. It's not based on the Coven.
Yeah, no, I love that. Some of the things that I really liked about the book were the characters were so complex, and because you're only getting first person view of the 2 sisters who are part of the story, each chapter is one is Hannah, one is Katie, and you're getting like each of their perspectives of sometimes the same situation and sometimes like concurrent time frames. So I found that really fascinating, and that the book wasn't just about like women being catty and backstabbing. And it also wasn't about like women holding hands and singing Kumbaya. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about like why you chose to go that route. I know folks have been talking about either calling this like an uber feminist book, like a feminist thriller, or like an anti-feminist book because the women weren't super nice to each other. But talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think I said on the Feminist Book Club podcast that like, I guess it's a feminist thriller because I consider myself a feminist and I wrote it. So my art is feminist art. Okay.
Yes.
Beyond that, I just really wanted my characters to feel real and complex. And I didn't want to, my idea was not so much to critique women for things like internalized misogyny and a sense of competition and sort of this idea that like another woman's success is my failure and success is a zero-sum game. All of these sort of messages that we as women have gotten from the time we were born. My idea was not to imply that these women are bad people or bad feminists for sort of falling prey to these things that we've been taught to believe, but rather to critique the sort of misogynistic society that would lead us to those conclusions, right? So I do, when somebody says like, oh, this isn't feminist because they were being mean to each other, I'm like, well, somebody missed the point. Okay, that's fine. I can't, not every book is for everyone. That's fine. But in terms of actually developing these characters, I thought of them as all having sort of different approaches to how to be successful and how to be validated and accepted and liked and loved as women in society. And they all take sort of different approaches to that. Because I think women in particular, again, from the time that we're born, we are taught to pay attention to, people like when I do this, people don't like when I do this. Like, what are the things, what's the role that I can settle into? What is the sort of armor or, mask that I can put on that's going to make me palatable and allow me to get the things that I want? And so they have very different approaches. Like, as you mentioned, the two narrators are Hannah and Katie, who are sisters and both friends with Eleanor, the missing CEO. And Hannah is like that very buttoned up. She's a PR director. She's like always in charge, always in control. Everyone can rely on her. And that is sort of her path toward, success. Whereas her younger sister, Katie, who's the journalist, she's much more brash. She's really funny. She's like charismatic. She can get a crowd laughing as soon as she meets them. And so that is sort of her facade, her mask that she puts on. And it was fun to play with the dual narrators, with the first person takes on it, because Katie could look at her older sister, Hannah, and think like, God, I really wish that I could just be that together. And she's just like always on top of things. And I'm such a mess compared to her. But then you turn the page and you get to Hannah's perspective, and she resents always having to be the adult and the mom in a situation. And she looks at her little sister and looks at how men instantly fall in love with her. And everyone who meets her just, immediately is endeared to her, and she feels envious of that. And that's just something that I think we probably all humans, certainly all women that I know of, do, where you simultaneously feel kind of like an imposter. You feel like you're wearing this mask that you're stuck in, but you look at other women and you're like, God, like she has it all figured out. Like Mickey, one of the other main characters, is that like bohemian, like manic pixie dream girl who just like never looks uncomfortable, just always looks at ease. And don't we all have someone in our lives that we're just like, God, how does she just always seem so comfortable and so cool? And so going into their heads allowed me to sort of remind myself, like, no, nobody feels entirely like as perfect as they are trying to seem. And then that's sort of a theme to play with.
I love that. And I loved that, like you mentioned armor, kind of that, like it starts out like you only know what you're telling us about them, which kind of starts out where everybody's got this like perfect facade. And then kind of the further you get into the book, like that armor starts to chink, and then it starts to like come off, and then it's like everything unravels, which is amazing. And that's like what kept me kind of turning the pages, was like, well, what are we going to know about this person next? And I love, not to give anything away at all, but like just like the little trail of breadcrumbs that you were leaving us in each chapter, where it's like, you know, because it's a first person perspective, they could just happen to say something that you're like, wait, what does that mean? Who is that? Who are they talking about? And you don't know really until, you know, 10 chapters later. I thought particularly that was interesting with Katie's character, because you didn't really know a lot about her, and she just kept talking about her time in Michigan, and you didn't really know what was going on, what happened there. The other thing, so on this kind of theme of, you know, what was revealed in the book, is I really thought there was something there around like the need for spaces like the Herd and the Wing and the Riveter and Ethel's Club and the Coven. And, you know, you talked a little bit about some of these like women hate groups, these like men's rights activists who play, you know, a role within the book. And I just like, did you know that those things existed before you started writing the book, or was that something that kind of like revealed itself, or you just guessed like, I bet this exists because patriarchy?
It was really more the latter. It was more like, I know that anytime women try to do anything or, you know, make a space for themselves, like there's gonna be someone coming out of the, like I've been on Twitter since like 2008. Like I'm aware. And so in this case, it was sort of like codifying like who are the forces that from the start have been against an institution like the Herd, and just would have such a problem with it. But it was fun to explore, because I think, you know, very much even in the last few months or year, we've seen such sort of delight in female CEOs taking a fall in some way. And so, for example, when you think about the CEO of Away or the CEO of Thinks, or even the New York Times Magazine just did a big piece on The Wing that basically consists of employees and former employees sort of, can I swear on this, crap talking their place of employment and the company,
sure.
And sort of being dismayed that they like thought it was going to be this feminist utopia, and then it ended up being, there was a very telling quote that was something like, you know, we were promised a feminist utopia, but it was just like any other company that wants to make its money. And it's like, of course it's a company that wants to make its money.
Why are you for-profit business that took money, you know?
Exactly. Like, why are you so shocked that like when a female CEO is in charge of a company, she needs to like sometimes be ruthless, and some, like, who is holding men up? Who is like writing articles about how mean the male CEOs are when they're, you know, just doing what they need to do and tightening their belts and that kind of thing. So I just thought there was, I think I got away from your actual question, but I thought there was a lot to play with of like how just, you know, angry people can be when women are trying to take their power and claim some space, in this case, literally for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that totally gets to the complexity of the situation, of the entire story and the entire narrative, and as well as the actual characters there. Tell me a little bit why like Hannah and Katie needed to be sisters in this. I thought that was such an interesting dynamic. I don't think, is it a spoiler to talk about the two of them together? So Hannah is adopted and does not look anything like Katie. And so there's this element of, you know, there's this racial element, so kind of a bit of class in there between all of the girls. But talk to me a little bit about that sister dynamic and why it was important to make them related.
Yeah. So I'm happy to talk about the sister relationship. Before I do, I'm actually just really curious to ask you, as somebody who is like running an all-female co-working space, like did any of that stuff about the anti-herd or like sort of resistance or criticism that feels sort of gendered, like did any of that ring true, or what has your experience been with that?
Yeah, you know, I think one thing that we're lucky to be in is that we're based in the Midwest, and so people tend to be a little bit like, you know, nicer about it. Nicer, I say Minnesota nice.
The graffiti on the wall wouldn't be nearly as.
I don't know. No, oh my gosh, no. No, that the C word is not welcome in the Midwest. But I definitely think that there's kind of like an underlying current there of like, well, you know, if men had their own space, they would be, you know, thrown out, you know, like people get a little bit like touchy on that. And certainly if you read the comments in any article that's written about us, there's a lot of that. I don't necessarily know that there's like an anti-Coven out there. But there is something that I've noticed is that we get pushback from older women. And I should say that our membership is really diverse in age, race, industry, socioeconomic. Like we have like 21 to 75, we have like a whole group of like very seasoned folks out of our St. Paul space in particular. But I think there is a group of women that have this mentality of like, well, we did it. Why can't you? You know, we did it without this space. We didn't need extra help. And I get it. Like I can empathize, or I can, you know, feel for that. For that. And I also think, to your point, like that comes from a misogynistic, like the way that we've grown up and the patriarchy and the way that we've been trained to believe that like you don't need a handout kind of situation. So that's been the interesting thing. I didn't see that dynamic in the book quite as much because maybe it's not as glaring. And maybe like the men tend to be a little louder.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because I'm from Milwaukee. I'm from Wisconsin, so like very familiar with the Midwest. But you're right. It's that sort of misogyny that would have been really cool. Now I'm like, why didn't I have like a 6-year-old white woman character other than Karen the mom? But yeah, I think in New York, like it's a bit more maybe an East Coast thing. Like pushback will be a little more in your face and a little less, you know, between the lines. Like I know that whole Midwestern implication kind of thing that we can do.
Yeah. Well, and Midwesterners tend to be like hardy people. And so I think that like goes for like our professional lives too, is like, I can weather this because I can take on anything, and I can put my head down and get work done. And so when any kind of disruption, even in like quote progressive places like Minneapolis, any kind of disruption that's like maybe too progressive for folks, like you start to see people who deem themselves like, you know, progressive thinkers, like get really defensive of like, oh my gosh, like that's too much. Don't be too feminist.
Right.
So I think that's where I see most of the pushback would be in that area. But that is interesting. I thought it was so funny. I was like, she must have a Midwest connection, because there were a few times in the book where people keep getting Michigan and Minnesota confused, not knowing where those two places are. And I've definitely heard that out on both coasts.
And then the best part was that somebody, a professional reviewer, I think it was Booklist or something, talked about how Katie had just moved back from Michigan, or had just moved back from Minnesota. And I was like, you made the mistake that I was teasing them about. Like, they're great. They're not even touching. Anyway, as you know.
That's so funny. That's funny. It's amazing. And I think, you know, no matter where you are in the United States or in the world, like, you know, patriarchy shows up differently for everybody. And because I'm in the Midwest, I feel like it's a little more, it's understated. It's certainly there. And obviously there's a lot of policies in place that are like very, very quiet, but very harmful to women. So I think your book is like pointing out the reason why these spaces are so important and needed. And I think the push for us from the very beginning at the Coven has always been like, you know, how do we make this space as inclusive as possible? How do we build in intersectionality so that we aren't just a bunch of white feminists? Like, you know, that, like, how do we do those things? And I think what was interesting about the book is that you point that out, that was like the original dream of the space. And it may have like deviated from that because of power and money and opportunity to grow and scale and things like that. And I think that's what a lot of spaces kind of come up, like butt up against. And then it becomes that question of like, is it okay for a space to exist? Is it okay for that space to exist in the world? Because some women need that, maybe more affluent and wealthy women need that. And then what does everybody else get? So I think we ask ourselves that question every day of like, how do we make sure that whatever we're doing in the world is intersectional?
Yeah, no, I think that's so elegantly said. And like you sort of aims to be inclusive, but necessarily has to be exclusive. Like that's how any kind of club works, with membership dues and, you know, limited yardage, and like just can't be open to everyone in the world. And so there is that inherent tension. And then again, you're sort of swimming upstream because you're creating this company in a still misogynistic society, in a patriarchal, you know, commercial, consumerist, capitalistic world that could really be like pushing you towards exclusivity and sort of away from these sort of founding tenets. So I think that's really well put. And to answer your question about the sisters, which I think is kind of related to, I don't remember why I wanted them to be sisters. I think I just wanted to write a sisters book next. I'm very close to my own sister. And I just think there's such interesting, again, dynamics of two people who think they know everything about each other, but actually, there's huge swaths of things that we don't know. And yet this is the person you sort of know best because you've known them since birth. And so I thought that would be fun for sisters who are friends and have mutual friends, which is true of my sister and myself as well. And then I wanted Hannah, the older sister, to be adopted and a woman of color. Part of that was just, I don't want to keep writing books with all white casts. And that is what's going to happen if I stick to what I know and I stick to my own experience. But so that was kind of the thinking there, but it was also scary. And, I really tried to do that perspective justice and tried to, talk to friends about their experiences and like work in real life details and times that they just sort of trying to be empathetic to like times that this character would think of things that I wouldn't necessarily think of about calling 911, about a relationship with the cops, about appearing in a photo in a sea of white faces and stuff like that. So that was interesting to and challenging and a little scary to take on. But I wanted to, challenge myself for the sake of not just having a bunch of white upper middle class characters, which can be really easy for thriller writers like myself to default to, who are white upper middle class girls.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I resonated actually deeply with Hannah's story as like the oftentimes like tokenized friend, or, the person who, you get called all the time to be in a photo, those types of things. And I just thought that was really important. In one of the, I can't remember, it's like towards the end, but they start talking a little bit about like investors and like, oh, they'll want them in their portfolio because they'll want like a woman, or they'll want like the individual person, or they'll want, like they want to up their diversity numbers, which I just think is so ridiculous. So I appreciated that you built that part into the story and really the complexity of it. There were some like really heart moments of the story that weren't just about like, it wasn't just like, oh, and Hannah's the woman of color in the space and like, we're not going to address her feelings. I mean, it would be really difficult to do that without, because the book is like half hers, right? It's half her perspective. So I appreciated that you included some of those deeper thoughts that you might have been having.
Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned class too. And so I want to touch on that a little bit before we open up for questions here. But social and socioeconomic class is really plays a huge role in this story, particularly around like, lower class individuals almost seen as disposable, to a few of the characters that are in the book, partially because of power, maybe because of like the way that they grew up. But it's not like necessarily overtly mentioned. In fact, I thought it was kind of an underlying tone through the whole book. And then at the end, you kind of like clicked for me. I was like, oh yeah, I get it. So talk to us a little bit about class and how that played a role in the story.
Yeah. So again, when I was trying to envision this space and to make the herd real, I was like, who would be a member there? And definitely on the surface, it would look like it's diverse in all the right ways. And they would have a scholarship program, and there would be, non-binary members, and like there would be all these different sort of things that as soon as you walked in, you were like, this is what the world should be. This is the future. But, a theme that I was playing with, kind of going hand in hand with that whole thing about armor, that whole thing about masks, is sort of that pressure that women feel to be perfect in every way, and to sort of, we're not keeping up with the Joneses necessarily, because that's gauche, but we're like keeping up with the Instagram perfect facades that our friends maintain. And it takes a lot of money to look and live and talk and all those other things, like Eleanor, like Hannah, like all of these women. And so, yeah, it was something that I felt had to be addressed and kind of baked into it. And, I think I know what sort of subplot you're talking about, which because of spoilers, we can't get
Yeah.
deep into, but there is something really interesting with like people who are simultaneously truly self-made. Like Eleanor was brilliant and like, had great ideas and knew how to start this company, but then also when they just have absolutely every force from day one working in their favor to help get them there and to make them the kind of person that can go in front of investors and to make them, we end up seeing her parents' home at one point, and it's this 18th century mansion in Beverly, Massachusetts, which was based on a real friend's place I visited once and just like still can't get out of my mind. So I thought there was some interesting sort of between the lines commentary to be made about, the kind of the current state of feminism and consumerist feminism, commercial feminism, and like who can afford to be that, who can afford to sort of have that Instagram aesthetic of feminism.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not everyone.
Of course. Well, and that begs, I think, the question of like, I think that's not feminism. It's a place where you can go and express feminism and, help change, the world of intersectionality, because if it's not intersectional, it's not feminism to me. But it feels like, is there something there that means like this? It's not necessarily the physical space that is feminism, right? It's just that is a physical space. It's beautiful that people like, and some people have access to, and others don't. And from that space, there can be, plumes of feminism, feminist waves that come out of the space. I found that really fascinating, and I appreciated. I actually really appreciated that underlying, and I hope everybody reads the book because you'll get it at the end. And I just thought that was really interesting. Kind of how the people with power within the book have kind of like either disposed of or forgot, or have kind of tossed aside some of the people who helped get them where they are, because they don't have the means to take care of it themselves.
Yeah. And I mean, it's something I like see with white feminists sometimes too, where they're so quick to, call for more equality for themselves. And it's like, okay, yes, like compared to, to speak in very broad terms, compared to men, non-men are held down, and there's definitely battles to be fought, but like, let's not pretend that you as white women are the only ones, as cis powerful white women are the only ones who are in any way are being held down and have progress to be made.
Yeah, or that avocado toast is going to solve it. I mean, it might help because you'll be like full and able to put your brain to it, but I mean, none of that's actually going to solve the problem.
Truly, the Instagrams, though beautiful, will not solve misogyny. Sorry.
I love that. Well, I did want to open it up for questions. It's a 4:05 here. Steph, did you want to pop in and read them for us?
Here I am. Thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful. I loved the defense of avocado toast. I also, Andrea, like the moment when you said, "Can I swear?" and then you said "crap" was like the most Midwestern.
Well, I was thinking of a more serious. That was me toning it down. I mean, I have a New York mouth now. It's not.
Well, you can swear if you need to at any point going forward. So I've got some questions from the audience. Let's see here. The first one is from Claire. What do you think audiences find so compelling about a villainous woman? It seems there's been a huge boom of thrillers recently that feature female characters as the who and the whodunit, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
That's a great question. Thanks, Claire. I think it sort of goes hand in hand with feminism, to go back to our theme, but I think we are beginning to acknowledge that women don't need to just be second fiddle in a book, and they don't need to be, perfect and lovely for us to sort of enjoy learning about them and for us to enjoy reading about them. And this is something I feel strongly about in feminism. Like, it means that there can be awful women too. It means that there can be, non-progressive women. There can be right-wing women. There can be all sorts of people who really run the gamut. It's just that we have equal access to opportunities. So I also will say, I think Gone Girl was sort of a game changer in the space, in the domestic thriller space, and in sort of feminist thrillers and like female driven thrillers and suspense, where she pushed the unlikable female character to the next level, and sort of raised the bar for writers after her, where she both cleared a path so that people are a little more ready to accept women behaving badly, but for good reasons. And she also just raised the bar in terms of like the kinds of twists that readers are looking for now, and the sort of the complexity of our female characters, where, all of these books are passing the Bechdel test with flying colors these days, which was not really the state of thrillers, even a few decades ago. So I think it's just our sort of societal like opening up to the idea that women can be awful too, and that is still interesting, and women aren't always sort of the sweet innocent victim princess in a tower, and men aren't always the savior and also the villain. We're letting women be anti-heroes for the first time, and I think that's awesome. I love it.
This question is from Rachel. Does writing thrillers make you feel more jumpy, suspicious, wary of danger lurking around every corner?
Interesting question. No one's ever asked me that. I actually think it makes me feel more confident in a weird way. I actually really don't like true crime. True crime makes me uncomfortable because I think I overemphasize with the victim or the victim's remaining family, or just I can't really get away from the fact that these were like real people, often real women that were sort of victimized. But when I write thrillers and have all sorts of awful things happening to women, I'm in control, and I'm sort of playing out my fears in different ways, I think, and sort of going into the darkest side of myself and pulling from that in a way that feels productive and fun instead of scary and like something I should keep away from. So I will say, I think I get scared a normal amount. I get scared like walking on the street at night if someone's coming up behind me or whatever. But in scenarios that are probably pretty neutral and I'm with friends, I'm always the one who like my brain immediately goes to the darkest place of like, what would this be in a noir or in a thriller of like, oh, that guy's probably late because like his wife is in a suitcase and like he's trying to get away from whatever. Like I am just constantly spinning these like very dark narratives on the spot and forgetting that other people's brains don't work that way. And so friends will sort of give me funny looks and be like, not what I thought of.
You're like, I'm working. Okay.
Yeah. It never turns off.
This question is from Kate. What's your best advice for someone who's first dipping their toes into writing a whodunit?
That is also a great question. Thank you, Kate. My best advice would be to read a bunch and to start with some sort of books on process. I really recommend Save the Cat Writes a Novel. There's Superstructure. There's other books that sort of walk you through what the plot of any book, including any successful book, including whodunits, needs to be, and sort of the emotional beats that you need to hit at different points. And that can just be really helpful as you're like spinning with ideas and trying to, even though I don't outline, even as you're spinning with ideas to sort of just begin to grasp how the story is going to go, because whodunits are really hard. I don't know why I keep writing them, because you have to simultaneously thread through red herrings and thread through miniature mysteries that lead into the big one, without making any twists too obvious, but seeding them properly so that they don't feel like they came out of nowhere. So just know that it'll take a lot of revisions and going back and reseeding things and making things more or less subtle. But that's part of the fun. And then the other thing I would definitely say is like, just write. People mistakenly think that they can't start writing until they have every piece of that outline completely figured out. And I understand that way of thinking, but that can really hinder you from getting started. And sometimes you just need to write 2 chapters, and then suddenly, oh my God, now I understand the character, and that gave me so many ideas. And then you can even do a full outline if that's what you need. So I'd say just read some books and jump in and see where it takes you, because they're really fun. If you like reading them, they're really fun to write.
I think that you're the third or fourth person to mention Save a Cat, right? What is it? Save the Cat
writes the novel. Do I have one over here? Yeah. I had one before. No.
But it's
this one.
There we go.
Literally like on my desk at all times. It's great.
Seems like aspiring writers out there take note. I think we have time for one more question, and this is for Andrea, but I'm going to ask it to both of you because I think it's interesting given the fact that we have switched to a whole virtual life now. What are you working on, and how are you kind of filling your days with creativity through quarantine? And Andrea, if you want to start, and then Alex, if you have something to add, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So yeah, my entire life has been in a 360 square foot studio apartment in Brooklyn for two months now. And that's really strange and took a lot of adjustment. But I was lucky / unlucky in that my third book manuscript was due April 30th. So I had no choice but to work down to the wire. And so I just turned that in. It's also a thriller about complex female friendships, but though not a whodunit. So that was new and different. But yeah, now that I have that done, I am trying to watch things I wouldn't normally watch and read things I wouldn't normally read. I had the problem that a lot of people are having where I just couldn't dive into the books that I thought I was going to dive into. And it was hard for stuff to hold my attention. So if that's the case for you, I recommend thrillers, page-turning thrillers, such as The Lost Night and The Herd. But also, like, I've been rereading old comic books. I have like Calvin and Hobbes books from when I was a kid. I've been, paging through just random weird stuff that's been in my bookshelf, YA stuff that I loved years ago. And I'm just trying to be very kind to myself and non-judgmental about the fact that I can't read as much as I would like, or be producing the same way I would like. I briefly was like, I'm gonna write a screenplay, and that fell by the wayside, and that's fine right now. So yeah, just trying to take it a day at a time and sort of let my attention be my guide and not be too judgmental if I'm not producing or consuming in the way I would like. Yeah.
I love hearing a bit more about you, Andrea, because Calvin and Hobbes comes up in the book. So
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is it on Eleanor's bookshelf? Okay.
Yes,
yep.
on Eleanor's bookshelf.
Yep.
I do remember that. I told you, I've been up all night reading it. Like,
yeah, you were like in this world. You know it better than me right now.
I was in it. So we shut our doors temporarily to both of our locations in the Twin Cities on March 16th or 17th. And within 24 hours of closing, we opened up a digital membership. So we didn't have digital offerings, but since closing our doors 2 months ago, we have grown to more than 400 new members who've joined since closing, which is amazing. That's huge growth, especially in the Twin Cities. I know, like, in New York, it's a little different. Population density is like, 400 would be like, oh my God, you're gonna die. But here that's huge. And so, we've been growing like 200 members a month, which is amazing. We offer 1 to 3 pieces of programming every day. So it's been really busy. But I think, it's a real testament of the community that, like, people want to come together. We've been exploring new ways to use Zoom. We've been exploring new ways to get people involved and off screen a bit, but staying connected as community without being in physical proximity. I think one of the things that we're thinking ahead to is, like, how do you sustain the digital community that we've now grown when we open our physical spaces again eventually and don't have more capacity, right? So the reason why we didn't have a digital community was because we didn't have capacity to run both, but now that's all we have. And so now when we're reopening our physical spaces eventually, like, we got to figure out how to operate those two things. Those are like hot on my mind. But we did launch a digital membership that's a pay what you can model. So it's, anywhere from $0 to $50 that you can pay. It's super accessible to folks with digital means. So that's like then a huge offering. Over 50% of the people who join aren't paying. So, you know, maybe they don't have access to extra dollars. Those are my kids in the background. But, you know, I mean, I think that's been really cool to see the community kind of come together virtually and see what happens next. I think, like, personally, like, life is totally bizarre. I have 2 kids under 5. I've got a husband who's also working at home and who's an entrepreneur and had to close his business down too for all of this. So I don't know, like, every day, every moment is like new. I feel great today. This is like such an awesome thing to look forward to. And I'm glad that I got a chance to do it with you, Andrea.
Well, thank you both
This
for
was
this.
really fun.
Alex, I can relate. I can see my husband circling around outside with our 2 kids because I told them to stay outside.
I know. Sorry, I kept going on mute because they're like reading Harry Potter, and then there's a lot of questions that come up. So I'm like snapping off camera here, like going like, shut up, everyone.
We're all adapting.
Yes.
And it's Mona, right? The cat. We didn't even get a Mona.
Yeah, I don't actually know where she went to nap. So
She's feeling a little camera shy today.
yeah, I guess so. Head to my Instagram and you'll see plenty of Monas, and she's my only, you know, being that I communicate with.
I love that.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and to St. Catherine's University and the Star Tribune for their presenting sponsorship. Alex, it's so great to hear about what the Coven is doing, and thank you so much for being here. And Andrea, we're all, like I said before we got on here, like, we're all such big fans of the Herd at the Loft, so we were thrilled to hear you talk today. And for those of you that are just coming to Andrea's work or want to gift a copy of the Herd for somebody's birthday or Mother's Day, it's an excellent gift. You can use this button right here and buy Andrea's book. And while you're there, you can consider supporting the Loft. All of our events for Wordplay are free, but we would love to continue to be able to do programming like this in the future. So any dollar amount would help. We still have, Thursday, Friday, 3 more days of Wordplay events. So please join us. The schedule is at loftwordplay.org. If you saw something on there that you missed live, it's archived. This event will be archived. So just join all the fun. Love getting together with our book-loving community. So thank you so much. And you too, if you just stay here for 1 minute, and we'll just maybe hold up the book one more time. Thanks, everyone.